Okay, so when you hear the name Karl Marx, what comes to mind? Probably a pretty cold, materialist economist, right? Someone buried in charts and economic data. But what if I told you the real secret to understanding his most famous work, Das Kapital, isn't in economics at all, but in theology? Let's unpack this theological blueprint that's been hiding in plain sight. So let's start with a really provocative idea from our source material. What if Marx's masterpiece is secretly built like a theological text? Not about some ancient spirit, but about a very, very modern demon, one that rules our world. Now, I know that sounds pretty wild, but the clues are right there, written directly into the pages of his work. Stick with me. So, how do we even begin to unlock this hidden layer in Marx's thinking? Well, the key is a concept he called fetichism. This is the intellectual skeleton key to the entire argument. And believe me, it's way more than just a quirky term. Now, for Marx, fetishism isn't about, ancient charms or idols in the traditional sense. It's this very modern social process where the things we create, our products, our money, our markets, suddenly seem to take on a life of their own. They become these independent forces that start to boss us around, turning the creator into the creation. And here's the kicker. Marx made this comparison himself. He says right there in Das Kapital that to really get how commodities behave, we have to look to the misty realms of the religious world. Because that's where you see the same thing happen, where the creations of our own minds, like gods and spirits, become these autonomous figures that rule over us. So this connection, it comes directly from him. And that religious analogy, it wasn't just a clever one-liner, it was a pattern. Marx consistently, and I mean consistently, used monstrous, demonic, almost gothic horror language to describe capital. He was building a profile, piece by piece. Let's look at the evidence, shall we? First up, he compares capital to Moloch. For those who don't know, Moloch was an ancient god to whom people sacrificed their own children by fire. It is a truly horrifying image. For Marx, this means capital isn't some neutral system. It's a bloodthirsty god that demands the actual sacrifice of human life for its own growth. And the imagery gets even more gothic from there. He also describes capital as a vampire. See, it's not just about profit. It's about draining the very life force, the labor, the time, the raw energy from the worker. This force, he argues, literally survives by consuming the life of another, which makes it parasitic, undead. And if there were any doubt left at all, Marx quotes the Book of Revelation, the actual Bible, directly in Das Kapital. By connecting the logic of the market to the mark of the beast, he's basically painting capital as the ultimate biblical monster, a power that demands your total allegiance just to participate in economic life. It's a totalizing, all-powerful system of control. So, when you put all these pieces together, the profile becomes crystal clear. Marx is painting a picture of capital as a modern demon, with all the classic attributes. It demands sacrifice of flesh and blood. It appears eternal and self-creating. It seems to magically create value out of nothing, and it acts like an invisible, all-powerful god that demands our worship. Okay, so if Marx is really writing a demonology, what was the original sin? What allowed this demon to be born in the first place? For this to be a theological critique, some kind of theological barrier must have been broken. And the answer, it turns out, lies in the death of a very, very old commandment. For the vast majority of Christian history, charging interest on a loan, what they called usury, was considered a major sin. And this wasn't some minor rule. It was a foundational economic ethic that shaped medieval Europe for centuries. It basically prevented money from being able to just make more money all by itself. But that ancient commandment was slowly and very deliberately dismantled from the inside. Theologians started to find loopholes, justifications. John Calvin was a huge figure here, arguing that for the common utility, the greater good, interest could be okay. By the end of the 16th century, that wall that had stood for 1,500 years had basically crumbled. And here is the source's powerful conclusion on this. This theological shift wasn't just some historical footnote. It was the essential precondition. The moral gate that held back the self-expanding power of money was thrown open. And now, the demon was free to be born. This brings us to the final, and maybe the most surprising part of this whole story. It's a part that reframes Marx's famous atheism in a completely new light. It wasn't what most of us think it was. To get this, we have to go back to the 2nd century, to a Christian leader named Justin Martyr. He proudly says, "We are also called atheists." Why?
Well, because the early Christians refused to worship the Roman gods and the emperor, who was considered divine. Their atheism was a powerful rejection of the false gods of the empire.
So the source makes this really crucial distinction. You have traditional atheism, which is what we usually think of, denying the existence of a creator God. But then you have what we can call prophetic atheism, the kind you see with the Hebrew prophets and early Christians, which is a fierce, passionate rejection of idols and false gods that demand our worship right here on earth.
And this is the final thesis, the big reveal. Marx's atheism wasn't really aimed at a transcendent God in heaven. It was the prophetic atheism of someone pointing at the central idol of the modern world, that all-powerful, life-draining fetish of capital, and shouting, "This is your false god, and I refuse to worship it."
So in the end, this whole analysis forces us to ask a question of ourselves. Marx spent his life diagnosing the demon of the 19th century, a system that demanded human sacrifice on the altar of accumulation. And his work kind of leaves us with a homework assignment to look around us and identify the unquestioned powers, the modern fetishes that demand sacrifice in our own time. What are they?